Some of the most interesting lessons of a parasha, especially a parasha that is so filled with intrigue and suspense as this week's, are the small items, the little twists of the plot that can get lost among the towering themes and events. It's something I realized once again when reviewing the parasha at the story of the pregnancy of Rivka, the struggle of her two unborn children, her existential self-doubt, and ultimately her attempt to discover what was really happening as she set off to inquire of God, Vatelech lidrosh et Hashem. But what does inquire of God mean? According to the Ramban, she went to daven. While Rashi explains that she went to the Beit Midrasho Shel Shem. She went to Shem to seek his prophetic insights. But if she wanted to pray, why leave home? Why not just stand in the field as did her husband when he prayed? And if she wanted to speak to a prophet, why not speak to the greatest prophet of her time, her father-in-law, Avraham Avinu? According to Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Asher, who we know as the Baal HaTurim, the reason Rivka went to Shem and not to Avraham Avinu was because she didn't want Avraham to worry. And yet, the great Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, the Netziv, suggests something entirely different. He writes that Rivka didn't go to Avraham because Avraham wouldn't have been able to address her concerns, since Avraham Avinu's prophetic powers were not as great as Shem's, and did not include the ability to see into the future. Therefore, Rivka went la'adam gadol, to a great person. Ki hu ro'eh v'yodea. She knew that he knew the future. He knew what the future had in store for her and her unborn children. But how could Shem's powers have been greater than Abraham's? Why would this son of Noach, who sat secluded in a yeshiva together with his great-grandson Ever, outshine the great Avraham, the progenitor of our faith, the man who recognized God and spread his message throughout the entire world? The answer is found in the Netziv's comment to last week's parasha, where he explains that while Avraham Avinu was a great prophet, he didn't have the same level of divine inspiration, of Ruach HaKodesh, as did his wife, Sarah. Because Ruach HaKodesh requires a person to withdraw from this world, ulehit boded, and seek a special connection with God. But Avraham, in his righteousness, haya manhig et ha'olam umadricham la'avodat Hashem. He chose not to withdraw, but to engage, to lead the world and direct others to the service of God. And when he made that choice, he forfeited some of his personal potential to rise to the same level of Ruach HaKodesh as could others. But that's not all. Because the Netziv refers us to a Chatam Sofer, to the great Rabbi Moshe Sofer of Preshburg, and a comment he made in his introduction to Sefer Breshit that addresses the question, but was it fair? Was it fair that Avraham lost out by doing the right thing? Maybe he should have found an open shtender in the Shem Ve'ever Yeshiva, and maybe he should have sat there secluded from others, communing with God and rising to new levels of personal self-actualization. Wrote the Khatam Sofer that such a suggestion is all wrong. Because when Avraham Avinu forfeited some of what he could have been, he did exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted him to do. Because life is not about our selfish needs. Rather, it's about the needs of a community, the needs of a klal. And therefore, even though Avraham Avinu may not have reached his own personal potential of spirituality, God rewarded him. He protected him. And he even offered him some remedial connection by refusing to do things without Avraham Avinu's foreknowledge. And that's what happened, said the Khatam Sofer, during the destruction of Sodom, which Avraham Avinu could not foresee. But God made sure he would know all about. As God said, "Hamechaseh ani miAvraham davar." Can I hide anything from my faithful servant Avraham? This past week, Rabbi Beryl Wine told an amazing story in a class he gave about the Chofetz Chaim, a story that he heard from his father-in-law, Rabbi Eliezer Levin of Detroit, who had grown up as a child in the Chofetz Chaim's home. Apparently, in a nearby town to Radin, there was a mikvah that had fallen into disrepair. But for whatever reason, the leadership of that town felt that they couldn't collect the necessary funds. So they let matters slide and the mikvah go unrepaired. When the Chofetz Chaim heard this, he went to the Beis Medrash of the yeshiva in Radin and he appealed that someone go to that town on Yom Kippur to make an appeal to fix the mikvah. Not long afterward, a Talmid of the yeshiva went to the Chofetz Chaim to review a difficult Tosfos he was learning. The Chofetz Chaim went back and forth with this Talmid until he mastered the Tosfos. At which point the Chofetz Chaim looked at him and asked, "Maybe you'll go to that town to make the appeal." The Bacher paused for a moment, but then replied, "Rebbe, how can I leave the yeshiva on Yom Kippur? How can I go to a town on such a sacred day where the Balabatim don't even understand the need to fix their own mikvah?" The Chofetz Chaim got up from his chair, stared at the Talmud, and he exclaimed, "Feh on your Tosfos. What is Tosfos when Jews need your help?" Said Rabbi Wine, "To be a rabbi means you need to leave the safety of the Beis Medrash and be involved in all of the complexities of life, of real life. To be a rabbi means that you don't get to be a spiritual person. Vatelech lidrosh et Hashem." Rivka went to seek God, but she didn't go to Avraham. Instead, she went to seek God from Shem, because Avraham knew, and Avraham teaches us that the I is not as important as the we. And therefore, while there are those who seclude themselves from society, the greatest fulfillment of God's wishes is for us to be involved in life, to take the risk being out there, bringing people closer to understanding the truth of God's world, to serving God's people, to bringing God's message to everyone, near and far. Vatelech lidrosh et Hashem. Shabbat Shalom.